as they were starting their engines, those tanks, my tank crested the rise and entered their 18-tank coil. And from there, engagements were very close range, like 300 meters, which is it's like a knife fight for tanks. I could see the expressions on the individual tank commanders' faces as we were destroying them with anti-tank rounds. You couldn't tell the difference between the gun going off, their tank being impacted, and arcs of blue sparks coming back over our heads from the impact of our rounds.
You are about to embark upon the great crusade
to meet this mounting aggression.
And make no mistake about it, good will prevail.
In February 1991, coalition forces were nearing victory in the Gulf War as Iraqi forces fled Kuwait en masse. In a flanking maneuver, the 2nd Armored Cavalry Regiment assaulted entrenched Republican Guard armored divisions defending the Iraqi retreat. The attack marked the beginning of the largest tank battle since World War II. Leading the charge with Eagle Troop was then Captain H.R. McMaster, who quickly found his men severely outnumbered. Through audacity and surprise, McMaster's tanks destroyed 20 personnel carriers, 28 tanks, and 30 trucks in 23 minutes. He suffered 0 losses and would be awarded the Silver Star for valor in history's last great tank battle, the Battle of 73 Easting. Bringing you Lieutenant General McMaster's story is World of Tanks. Roll out into the combat zone to do battle against 100 million players on your PC in a completely free game to play with over 800 light, medium, and heavy tanks. How you play is up to you. Historical accuracy and inspiration means authentic models and vehicle characteristics that make you feel like a real tank commander, taking part in a furious armored offensive. Earn experience, modify and upgrade your tank, create a steel beast ready for any challenge. You can rally your teammates, devise a battle plan, and destroy the competition in over 40 battle arenas. In World of Tanks, you can do battle in a main battle tank, just like General McMaster did in his M1A1 Abrams tank, and blow away your enemy with an armor-piercing round. Download World of Tanks today with the link in the description. Use the code TANKMANIA to get a free 7-day premium account, 250,000 credits, the premium Tier 5 tank Excelsior, and 3 rental tanks for 10 battles each, the Tier 6 Tiger 131, Cromwell B, and T-3485M. Now we take you to Army Lieutenant General H.R. McMaster on his experience in the last great tank battle of the 20th century.
I was born in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, and I grew up there and left there when I was 17 to go to West Point. Well, it's not super fun, as like maybe some other schools, but what it teaches you is how much you can accomplish when you work together as a team. West Point is very challenging curriculum, so you learn very early the need to prioritize efforts. You have to learn how to study, how to think, read, write in a way that's effective and efficient as well with your time. That's really important. I played rugby there, had a wonderful experience with my rugby teammates. I had gone to a military high school, though, too. I begged my parents to go to Valley Forge Military Academy because I wanted to go into the Army right away. So I was sort of used to the military academy discipline system and maybe too used to it. So at West Point, sometimes I was misunderstood as a cadet, or maybe a victim of circumstance. But I had a great experience there.
1984, you finish your time at West Point and you're commissioned, and you head to the 2nd Armored Division.
Right.
What was your immediate role there?
Well, nothing went as planned. Right? I was commissioned in aviation, which was a relatively new branch. And because it was new, I went to the Armor Basic course on the way to flight school. At Armor Basic course, they found an astigmatism in my eye that they hadn't found before, disqualified me from aviation. And then I said, well, I'd rather be an infantry officer. That was my second choice. Can I go to Fort Benning and restart? They said, no, it's not cost effective. You're an armor officer. So that's how I became an armor and cavalry officer. Then I wanted to go to Germany, right? That's where the action was in the Cold War in the cavalry regiments in particular. And they said, okay, well, how about Fort Hood, Texas? Instead, like nothing worked out. And as I had planned. And then tanks grew on me, when I was in the basic course. And when I got to my battalion, 166 Armor, oldest tank battalion in the Army, I was excited for a tank platoon. And I walked in and met the S3, and he said, congratulations, you're the support platoon leader. And I didn't even know what a support platoon was. So, it just really, but every experience was tremendous. I wouldn't change a thing in retrospect. And at the time, of course, I thought, well, nothing's going according to plan. This is terrible. But actually, all those experiences were wonderful. At Fort Hood, a great division there in the 2nd Armored Division, a great division commander named Roger Price, who had a guy named Colonel Don Holder, as his G3, who then later was my regimental commander, who was just the best trainer and educator, I think, in our Army. And it was just a wonderful experience as a support platoon leader, a tank platoon leader, scout platoon leader. And I think it really set me up for hopefully successful troop command later.
Were you still at Fort Hood when Iraq invaded Kuwait in 1990?
No, by that point I was in the 2nd Armored Cavalry Regiment. And as I told you, nothing went according to plan. I mean, my plan was to get out of the Army after 5 years, right? And then maybe go to law school, and then one night at Fort Hood, Texas, I took my non-commissioned officers to Right Arm Night. My old motor sergeants when I was XO and my scout section sergeants and scout platoon sergeant, and they talked me into staying in the Army that night. And I kind of knew already that I didn't want to leave active service. And so I went home and told Katie, I said, hey, how about staying on, which she was completely supportive of. And in my recent retirement party, she said, well, when I met HR, I was getting out of the Army after 5 years, and she looked at me and said, thank you for the bonus 29.
So once Iraq invaded Kuwait in August of 1990, it was pretty clear that it was at least likely that the U.S. would be going to war there, and the buildup began pretty quickly after that. What was the role for your unit? What were you focused on during Desert Shield?
Well, our cavalry troop, this is before I took command, but the troop I would take command of, was patrolling the east-west German border in October of 1989. I was a regimental plans officer. So our troopers saw that dramatic change in the Iron Curtain parting, and going from one moment staring down East German border guards who had shot people at that very stretch of the border who were trying to escape East Germany. They went from that to being flooded by East Germans with bouquets of flowers and bottles of wine. It was just a phenomenal experience to be in a border cavalry regiment at that time. And I remember soon after that, my wife and I were in an argument, Katie and I were in an argument about something silly, and she said, you're just angry because you don't have an enemy anymore. and then of course, in August 1990, Saddam Hussein invades Kuwait, and we were in the middle of a very rigorous training program in our regiment. We felt like we were at a very high rate of readiness, or level of readiness. We had just finished gunnery and shot very well on the ranges at Grafenwehr, and we were about to go out on a maneuver exercise on the German countryside against a British opposing force. And that was the day we're about to roll out. We're doing a rehearsal exercise on a basketball court. We'd drawn in the terrain, and our tank commanders, Bradley commanders, were walking through. And my XO came over with the news that Saddam Hussein invaded Kuwait. I just felt from that moment we were going to go. And I brought the troop together, and I said, hey, we have to make the most out of this training, because the next operations order I give you may be in the desert sands of Saudi Arabia. I really thought we were going to go from the beginning. My lieutenants, I think, thought I was crazy, but I really just had a sense that we were just too ready for this mission. And there was a period of waiting now until November, when the Secretary of Defense made the announcement that we heard 2nd Cavalry Regiment. And frankly, I was thrilled, because I felt like we were so prepared. Our troop had really developed a high degree of confidence in one another, a high degree of just not just training, but trust in each other and our ability to fight together as a team. So one of the things I think are most important to do is to explain to your soldiers everything you can tell them about the broader campaign, right? So they know it's not Eagle Troop 2nd Cavalry against the Republican Guard. They can see, right, how the theater commander the CENTCOM commander, Charles Schwarzkopf, was putting together the air and ground campaigns, for example. So I would go around platoon to platoon and brief them on the overall campaign plan and where we fit in. And essentially, we were part of a regimental offensive covering force, which is an offensive security operation aimed to ensure the freedom of movement and action of the main body to prevent their premature commitment of the divisions that were moving behind us. Our mission was to find the Republican Guard main defenses, through our development of situational understanding and sometimes point close combat, to determine where they were strong, where they were weak, isolate their strengths, and then help pull those divisions, almost like fire and forget missiles, into weakness, so they could destroy the Republican Guard, and that was our mission.
You became well known for a tank battle known as 73 Eastling. Explain how the two forces converged and how you were able to be so successful.
Well, we had 9 tanks and 12 Bradley fighting vehicles, 2 mortar squads, and as I mentioned, we were conducting this offensive covering force. Our movement was halting on the 26th of February, 1991, because I think Regiment was trying to control our advance, and I learned kind of in retrospect to keep us out of close combat with the Republican Guard main defenses. But what happened on this day is, first of all, the night before it was just driving rain, pouring rain, that was replaced in the morning by heavy fog. So visibility was very limited by the fog. And then as soon as the fog lifted, a sandstorm started. And so our visibility was limited. And we were in what appeared to be a featureless desert. We had no maps of the area. We had this new thing called a global positioning system. We had 3 of them in our cavalry troop. But we were essentially navigating by dead reckoning because those GPSs would go out. We didn't realize that we were paralleling a road around which the Republican Guard Tal Afar Division had organized this defense. Of course, the Republican Guard, not knowing we had this thing called GPS, thought, okay, they're going to have to parallel this road or they're going to get hopelessly lost in this featureless desert. And so they organized their defense what we call a reverse slope on the backside of an imperceptible ridge in the desert. And so as we were paralleling this road, not knowing we were paralleling a road, we came upon a barracks area. It had been a Republican Guard training area where they shot gunnery. They knew the terrain extremely well. And this division, these 2 divisions really, were given the mission of defending, oriented to the west where we're coming from, to buy time for the other forces to be able to pull out of Kuwait, to be able to escape Kuwait. And we were first fired on by these buildings. We suppressed those buildings with tank main gun fire, gave a troop fire command, and all 9 of our tanks fired simultaneously high explosive rounds into the barracks area. And then we received permission again in this sort of halting movement to go to the 7-0 easting, which is a north-south grid line on the map. And as we were beginning to move in that direction, I just got a sense that we were going to hit main defenses. And that's when I made the decision to go to a tanks lead formation, to pull our Bradleys in behind the tanks and to lead with a 9-tank wedge. And just as my tank was cresting this rise, our scout on the far north, the left of our formation, identified a hot spot. This is Sergeant David Lawrence, who I served with at Fort Hood in my scout platoon. He was quite a character. And he said it was Gunner Bradley Feltman, who went on to be a Command Sergeant Major, wonderful sergeant also. What do you think that is? He said, I don't know. He said, well, let's put a tow missile into it. So he fired a tow missile into the tank and identified it as a tank as the turret was rended from the hull and thrown into the air. So he's yelling tanks direct front. And then what the platoon does is begin to conduct reconnaissance by fire, firing 25 millimeter high explosive forward, which was a little bit unnerving as I came forward of them and I was asking the platoon leader to cease fire so the tanks could come forward with me. As I'm issuing the ceasefire, my tank comes over that rise and I see immediately, 9, 10 tanks dug-in fighting positions, or really in revetments forward of my tank. At that point, my driver recognizes that we're going to have 4 tanks on my right, 4 tanks on my left. So on his own, Christopher Henskog, my driver, pivots to the right to bring the full force of our 9 tanks to bear on the enemy defensive positions. And we got a bit of a jump on them because they were looking at the explosions. Their turrets were overlooking the explosions in the barracks we had fired on, and that gave us just enough of a jump. And so by the time the other 8 tanks come over, we had already destroyed 3 of the T-72s. And then of course they took out 8 more near simultaneously. And that was the initial blow against this enemy force. Those burning armored vehicles created a huge curtain of smoke. And then we continued our attack toward these tanks. And as we penetrated that curtain of smoke and came out on the backside, that's when we could see the full sort of panoply of the enemy position, enemy infantry trying to reposition, multiple armored vehicles to our south and to our east. And that's when my executive officer called and said, hey, you're at the limit of advance, the 7-0 north-south. And my response was that we have to continue the attack. Just tell them I'm sorry. We can't stop. if we had stopped, I think it would have given this enemy force a chance to orient on us. We had to jump on them, and so we continued our attack for 3.5 additional kilometers. We wound up at the 73.8 easting on top of a ridge, and we were firing kind of the whole way, destroying armored vehicles, engaging infantry. Soldiers were very disciplined. Oftentimes, pockets of these infantry would hold their hands up to surrender. Our gunners would just come off of them, but then call the Bradleys, which these groups of infantry didn't know were coming through the curtain of smoke behind. These groups then of infantry were then re-shouldering their weapons, trying to engage our tanks from the rear with rifles, but also rocket-propelled grenades. And then the Bradleys were able to cut them down as they came through the smoke. We continued the attack up onto the second ridge, and this is where I found out later the brigade command post was. And the brigade commander, his name was Muhammad, who had actually gone to the infantry officer career course at Fort Benning, Georgia, and spoke perfect English. He was in his bunker. He heard the explosions or initial fire. He thought it was an air raid, so he ran into his bunker. Then one of his soldiers ran into yelling tanks to him. He came out, and by the time he came out, his whole formation was on fire, and we were advancing toward him. So he ran to get his reserve initiated, 18 T-72s in a circular formation, and as they were starting their engines, those tanks, my tank crested the rise and entered their 18 tank coil. And from there, engagements were very close range, like 300 meters, which is it's like a knife fight for tanks. I could see the expressions on the individual tank commanders' faces as we were destroying them with anti-tank rounds. You couldn't tell the difference between the gun going off, their tank being impacted, and arcs of blue sparks coming back over our heads from the impact of our rounds. So we destroyed those tanks, and then we halted on the far side of that ridge, and then destroyed everything within the range of our guns, and then consolidated our position there. There were some counterattacks through the night. One of our scout sections ran into some additional tanks as they went to make contact with an adjacent troop, and then we broadcast surrender appeals forward, and that's when Major Muhammad and initially I think 18 to 20 others came forward, and then hundreds came forward later after a large artillery strike and some other the use of our mortars forward us. One of our sergeants, Sergeant McReynolds, after the fight, I asked our soldiers to write their accounts of this battle. Those are in the archive at West Point, and some other archives, War College, I think, and Staff College. And in this account, McReynolds says, nobody, it was just kind of automatic. Nobody had to be told what to do. Other sergeants, Sergeant Martinez, said I had tremendous faith in my crew. My loader said to me right after the next day, he said, "Yes, sir, I ain't gonna lie, I was fixing to panic, but I just said, don't panic, do your job." And he said we had trained so often and under such realistic conditions that it was just that training kicked in. At the end of the Gulf War, our troop went to Al-Nasiriyah. We were the furthest north troop in Iraq at the end of the war. And my experience there over about a month period of time was that we were right in not taking over all of Iraq and not going to Baghdad. My initial inclination was when we got to Tallil Air Base and the ancient city of Ur of the Chaldees, an amazing place. This is Abraham's birthplace, is where our troop command post was essentially. I looked right at the sign, Baghdad, X number of kilometers. Like, well, if we're all here, why not just finish the job? That's what I thought. But as I interacted with Iraqi sheikhs of the tribes in the south, I realized how fractured and fragmented their society had become under the brutal repression of Saddam. And I also realized that it would have taken a Herculean effort to reestablish governance and rule of law, and to contend with what certainly would be an opportunistic Iran. And so I felt so strongly about it when I came back from Iraq in the summer of 1991. I wrote an op-ed for the Philadelphia Inquirer entitled "Why the U.S. Was Right in Not Taking Over All of Iraq." So as I was watching the invasion of Iraq from a fellowship at Stanford University, really tough duty, And I thought, hey, the most difficult is yet to come, and I wanted to be part of that to make a contribution. So I called the Human Resources Command now, or Personnel Command, and said, I'll take any job in Afghanistan or Iraq. I was just newly selected for promotion to colonel. They said, we don't have anything for you. I mean, we're all going to be leaving Iraq. I said, I don't think so. I think there's still going to be some work to do, and we have no slots. And I said, well, God, I can't believe that. And they were going to send me to Denver to plan the NATO ministers meeting, like to plan like luncheons instead of going to where I was like, I can't do that. I mean, so I usually was I never tried to really orchestrate an assignment, but I called General Abizade, who then was the deputy CENTCOM commander and had been my division commander when I was a cavalry squadron commander in Germany. And I said, hey, do you need a driver, perimeter guard? What do you want? Is there anything you need? Because he was operating out of Qatar and had a responsibility between Afghanistan and Iraq. And then he hired me as his executive officer, which was a tremendous experience. He jokingly said to me, HR, you're the worst XO I've ever had. And I said, General, it reflects poorly on your decision that you gave me the job to begin with, because you knew I had neither the organizational skills nor the fawning nature to be a good XO. So he moved me to be his initiatives group, commander's advisory group leader, which was a tremendous education. And I traveled the region for a year. And you mentioned, the fight that we had in Tal Afar. I learned from my fellow brigade commanders. I got to see every brigade in Iraq and the one brigade in Afghanistan multiple times over that year, and then identify best practices and to understand the situation there as well on its own terms in Iraq, but then also to learn from history, to learn from really previous counterinsurgency efforts, and to put together then a training and education regimen for our cavalry regiment before we deployed to Iraq. And then I think we did an effective job at assessing what was driving the conflict in our little part of Iraq there. And I believe we defeated the enemy in our area of operation.
So let's jump ahead to 2017. President Trump asks you to become National Security Advisor. You're still active duty at this point, which is a little bit different. Why did you take the job, and what did you learn about working in a civilian environment while still looking at issues related to national security?
Well, it was a tremendous privilege to do it. It was an easy decision to make. I mean, at this point, I've been serving in our Army for 33 years. I had planned to retire that summer, so this was in many ways a bonus round for me to be able to continue serving. And of course, the job is just a phenomenally important job, challenging, exciting, interesting. Again, General Goodpaster was a trailblazer here, being the first executive secretary of the National Security Council staff when he came in with President Eisenhower. And I had the opportunity, to read, think, write, and study national security decision-making, especially in the post-World War II period. So I felt like I was well-equipped at least to understand the scope of responsibilities and what a national security advisor should do for a president. I mean, what's unique about the national security advisor position is you're the one person in the national security and foreign policy establishment who has the president as his or her only client. And so you have to be able to do really five tasks well for a president. You have to staff the president, prepare him or her for duties and responsibilities involving foreign policy and national security, all engagements with foreign leaders, for example, phone calls, presidential travel, engagement with congressional leaders on matters of foreign policy, engagement with the media to a certain extent, although I didn't do a lot of that. And then the second task is to run a process that really provides options to the president, right? That coordinates and integrates across departments and agencies and presents the president with options for the greatest challenges to national security. And then once the president makes decisions, to assist in tracking the effective implementation of those decisions. The third task is to help communicate those decisions to the relevant audiences within government, outside of government, on the Hill. The fourth aspect of the job is to try to maintain unity of effort with allies, partners, like-minded countries, through your relationship with national security advisors and at times with heads of state, if you have that relationship with them, sometimes foreign ministers, although the Secretary of State usually does that, and then finally, I think you have to lead an organization, right? You have to provide the National Security Council staff with purpose, motivation, direction. You have to build an organization that's hopefully bound together by common purpose, mutual trust, and an organization that treats each other with respect and feels like people come to work feeling like they can make a difference and they're excited about it. So it's a wonderful position to have, and I think we made some significant contributions in those 13 months. It's a job, though, as you can imagine, you can get used up in a political environment. This was my first assignment in Washington. Was this job. I'd never even been assigned to the Pentagon. So there were aspects of the job I was better prepared for than others. No one is ever really fully prepared for it. I did talk to every living national security advisor to get their advice. It was super helpful. All of it was helpful. Dr. Kissinger was funny. I said, well, what did you do to organize your time so you can really reflect on complex problems and read and think deeply about something? And he said, this actually, in this job you cannot. He said, in this job you will create no new knowledge. You will consume the knowledge you already have. So I was particularly grateful for the experiences I had had in interagency, multinational task forces in Afghanistan, in Iraq, rewriting the Iraq campaign plan with diplomats and intelligence professionals and aid professionals and so forth. And I think that helped significantly.
You had some intense moments during that 13 months, I think particularly of the Syrian airstrikes and also the burgeoning issues with North Korea. Talk about the intensity of coming to a consensus on what to do in a situation like Syria.
One of the tasks I didn't mention is to be able to respond rapidly to crises. And I was really proud of the whole National Security Council team. And the cabinet, I think, did a wonderful job very quickly clarifying what had happened and then bringing options to the president. As you might recall, there was a high degree of concurrent activity because the president was also hosting President Xi Jinping and at Mar-a-Lago. At the same time, we were going through this compressed decision-making process. So what we were mainly concerned about is enforcing the red line that had been drawn in Syria, and that President Obama had drawn, that had not been enforced, that I think had emboldened not only Assad but other actors as well, the Iranians and Russians in Syria. But I think you could say that unenforced red line also emboldened to a certain extent Russia in connection with the annexation of Crimea, the invasion of Ukraine, maybe even the acceleration of Chinese reclamation efforts and weaponization of violence in the South China Sea. So we very much thought this was an important opportunity to highlight to the president not only the risks of action, but also our best shot at what are the risks of inaction. And the need in particular to ensure that, really at the 100th anniversary of World War I, to ensure that the use of chemical weapons don't again become routine. Especially any use, but the use to commit mass murder of innocent civilians. So we brought options to the president. I think he made a very sound decision, and then we assisted in implementation and follow up on it. There were, as I mentioned, a high degree of current activity. We had a meeting in the Situation Room. The president asked some good questions, and then we organized a short meeting at Mar-a-Lago as soon as we got there, where we communicated back to the Situation Room, answered his questions. We then ended the VTC, and in a small group, the president made the decision, and then we executed. It was during the dinner with Xi Jinping that I brought the president the note that the strike had occurred. It had been successful, at least in terms of striking the targets. And we had dinner. I mean, I missed dessert, but I was there for the whole dinner and everything. And the president leaned over, or maybe on the way out, told President Xi that he had about the strike. But a high degree of current activity. But I think it just shows that how when you have professionals working together well, you can manage that kind of a crisis. Now, it was nothing like, my predecessor, Condoleezza Rice, the challenge she had on 9/11. I mean, and she did a brilliant job. And I learned a lot from her in terms of thinking about how do you respond quickly to that kind of a crisis.